Oh, I'm just going to turn my phone off. Where did my phone?
Hi, everybody. It's Jane Johnston with the Briar Hill Group at Remax Camosun, host of Vancouver Island Time. I'm here with Geoff McLennan. He is going to be talking about a beginner's guide to podcasting. We, first of all, welcome, Geoff.
Hi, Jane. Thanks for having me.
No problem. So we actually have a group called the Real Estate Podcasting Group for people in real estate, but I thought this would be a good thing for everybody to chat with because podcasting is one of those things I think that's kind of an undiscovered benefit to business. And it's changed a lot in the past few years. It went from something that people hardly use to now I think it's more mainstream. First of all, what is your past? So you came from what sort of background before?
Like before real estate, I was working mostly in the film industry before real estate. So
Okay.
I was building sets and working in some motion capture stuff, and mostly film before real estate.
So I can sort of tell that because I think that you, to me, you're kind of irreverent. You're funny. You have a good sense of timing, and you do things that maybe aren't quite what's the word? Aren't quite conventional.
Sure.
You're not afraid to be yourself, is what I'm saying, right?
Definitely. Yeah.
And so, how long have you been a realtor?
I started in 2006, so 14 years now, I guess.
Okay, me too. And
Yeah.
and when did you start your podcast?
I think that was about 2 years ago. We started Multiple Offers.
Okay, so the podcast is called Multiple Offers, and then you do a few other things, right? So what else do you have your fingers in? What other pies?
I wouldn't call it necessarily a podcast, but I run it's not a food review show because we don't review restaurants, but we talk about the restaurants in and around the community I work in. Excuse me, that I love, and call that Eat New West. That actually came out of the podcast. The original idea was, sorry, excuse me. The original idea for the podcast, the reason we called it Multiple Offers was obviously multiple offers are a real estate thing, but we were listening to a lot of the podcasts in the real estate space, and they were very promotional. The guys who were doing it when we started, it was mostly just ads for why you should use that realtor. And we thought it would be fun to start a podcast that was 3 agents not working together and to really just talk about kind of the fly on the wall stuff, the things that, Jane, if you and I went out for lunch, we'd end up talking about for an hour, and we'd feel like old friends because we can all have these shared experiences. And so we kind of wanted it to be more of an insider look than an ad. And so that was the beginning. One of the guys on that podcast is very passionate about food. I'm very passionate about food. We all work the same market, which I think a lot of people is anti-intuitive, and we can talk more about that a bit later if that's something people want to get into. But because we ended up veering off into food so often, we ended up just starting our own little video YouTube channel. And that quickly grew. We started a YouTube channel and a Facebook group. And the Facebook group just last week passed 3,000 people in less than a year. And it's massively engaged. People are passionate about food, and they like to talk about it. So
what's that Facebook group called?
It's called Eat New West.
Eat New West. Okay. And then, are you finding it's more popular now since everything's moved to social media?
Oh, yeah. And it's more popular now, specifically with the pandemic. I think our engagement in the Eat New West group has gone up by about 300% in over the last month or so. Yeah, it's taken off like wildfire. It's out of control.
So you work with your dad in real estate, right?
Yep, that's right.
So is he on your podcast with you?
We've had him on a couple of times, and those have both been really good episodes. We mostly, when he comes on, just try and get him talking about kind of the good old days when real estate was a bit more of the Wild West, and some of the stories that come out of his mouth. I think for people who are used to modern real estate, are quite shocking. I grew up with all of it, so it doesn't. But I mean, he'll talk about some of the old, like, real slimy sales tactics stuff, like putting your sign in the front lawn before you even went in and pretending that you thought you already had the listing, and not stuff he necessarily did, but that was taught to realtors back when it was a much less regulated industry.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, when I first got into real estate, I came to it from teaching, and I was actually surprised how much I got flayed by
Right.
other realtors for mostly my marketing, because I got out there pretty quickly, and I think they were trying to kind of shut me down. Although in general, I will say, I think realtors are really great people. So I'm just seeing people are figuring out how to get on here. Okay, so yeah, I just took a course in real estate in Legal Update, and it just blows my mind, all the stuff that we need to know. It's so complicated. I like the fact that on your podcast, you're talking about buyers and sellers, and what the everyday experiences are. You have an episode, what's the average day in a realtor's life. These to me are sort of questions that people who want to get into the career might want, but also buyers and sellers who are looking to employ a realtor. They can interview you without actually having ever met you. Do you find that people do that?
Oh yeah, 100%. And when they call, it's the warmest lead ever. Like, a lot of times they don't tell you before you sit down that they met you through listening to the podcast, but when you walk through the door and they're like, "Oh, I feel like I already know you," and you definitely said it right about feeling like they've already interviewed you. One of the things is, doing it with two other agents that are potentially my competition. The thing is, the people, like, we're all very different people on the podcast, and the guy who's the right fit for, like, my buddy Matt, he wouldn't be a good fit for me, and vice versa, and Jer, and all of this stuff. We only had one person actually listened to, like, every episode and then was like, "I want to interview all three of you." And I was really happy that I got it, but it was really stressful. But most people, if they've come from the podcast, they already know you and whether they feel like you're a good fit. It's building that know, like, and trust, when you're not even there.
Do you find can you measure measure the business that you're getting from it?
It's kind of tough because it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
Like I said, I run the Eat New West Facebook group. I've got the, like, in New West, I farm. I've got the podcast. We run those podcasts as ads in the farm area. So it all sort of cross-pollinates. Like, I mean, every deal I've done so far this year, that person was a member of the Eat New West Facebook group. Some of them I knew beforehand. Some of them weren't, because I invited all my past clients into the group as well. I send out the podcast to my past clients. So it's hard to measure. Like, yes, there definitely are leads where you're like, "Oh, this guy said, oh, I called you because I listened to Strata 101. You already told me everything I need to be worried about as far as, like, rain screen technology in Vancouver and what the traps are. And I really appreciated that, and I called." And you do get those, but there's a lot more ones where you're like, okay, well, they may have listened to the podcast, they've engaged in the community stuff, they've gotten the mailer, like, it all kind of works together.
Right. I find that too. And I also find that people, not only do they know more about real estate, then they appreciate what you do because they understand the ins and outs, that it's not, when people say they want to be a realtor because they love houses, I'm like, you're in the wrong industry.
Totally. Yeah. One thing too that you can do, and Matt, one of the guys I do the podcast with, is much better at this than me, but it's a really good idea, is, we've done a lot of very instructional episodes, and he's got them all pre-done as BombBomb emails that, when his client books their inspection for the first time, he sends them the podcast on everything you need to be talking to your inspector about and everything. And, like, because we've done so many educational pieces that are like, here's step 1 in the process, here's step 3 in the process, here's step 27 in the process. it makes total sense. And I wish I was more organized than like Matt, but to fire those out to clients because you don't necessarily just need to generate a new lead with it. You can strengthen an existing relationship with the podcast as well.
Yeah, so you can create some evergreen content that you can use over and over again. And also you can take your podcast if you want, if you're a realtor, and you can utilize parts of it for blog posts as well. And so one thing that you do is you started filming your podcast.
Yes. Yeah, I'm really excited about that. I think we're about 7 episodes in to shooting the episodes. Now we're just doing them on Zoom, but we actually built a little studio space. And Jeremy, one of the guys on the show, his wife is a museum curator, and he was looking at the way that they in museums will like wrap a wall with like a beautiful piece of history. So we found a picture of New Westminster from the 30s, and we wrapped the studio with it. So completely surrounding the studio is this old tiny picture of New West, and we get absolute ton of comments just from people watching it being like, hey, when is this? That looks like Columbia Street. Is that Columbia Street? Like people engage just off the background of it. And also I think it sells authority having the video. Like when they see that we've taken this extra step, people really buy in that like, oh, these guys know New West. They care about New West. Your city stole being the capital of British Columbia from us, but we're still proud of the history.
I do find like so I hold my podcast completely opposite. So I go to people's houses and we talk about their neighborhoods, and so I focus on a number of different neighborhoods. You're focused on one neighborhood. So I just want to stress the difference is it really depends on what you want to get out of your podcast, right? You're going to attract, you're attracting a very niche market into New West, whereas I'm attracting people probably moving from elsewhere who are looking to figure out where they want to move within Victoria. That's who I usually get as my clientele.
Yeah, and one thing I like about you going to people, and one of our big focuses is trying to have more and more guests on the show. When we started doing the sort of Eat New West stuff, we realized that was translating into business advocates, not from the people who were watching and engaging it, but the restaurants that we were highlighting. And so we're trying to take that lesson and bring it into the podcast now as well of, hey, the more people around the industry that we highlight, the more little sort of people around town that are sort of, raging fans that we have the opportunity to create, which might even be a better opportunity for business than just the random listeners.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think it's all about business supporting business, right? And if you're going to support their community, they're going to support you. Yeah. First of all, hi, everybody. I'm seeing Nicole, Carol, Angela, and a few other people. If you have questions, let us know. Geoff and I are here to answer them. Okay, so you started your podcast. What's the difference between when you started it 2 years ago and now? I know for me, it's leaps and bounds for my own.
Oh, it is massive. And this is probably a good thing. Like if, we were talking before the show started about people just taking that first jump, right? Like just create something. Our very first episode of the podcast, we recorded it in Matt's dining room. We recorded it on one of our iPhones. Actually, no, we recorded it on all 3 of our iPhones because we had little lav mics, and they were just cheap mics. They weren't anything special. They were probably $30 a pop. And we recorded that, and then we cut them all together, and it was a nightmare, and we got it up and going. And I look back, and we're awkward, and the flow is weird, and we don't really pick up like when somebody is done versus when we're interrupting them. And it's a bit of a gong show. And, now we've got professionally produced bumpers that play between. We've got really nice mics. Everything's mixed properly. There's still tons of mistakes. That's never going to be fixed. But, the difference between sort of our level 1, day 1, and now is light years. And I think that's really important is, every step of the way, just make it a little bit better. Like, you don't need to worry about, especially in our business, right? Like, we're just trying to connect with people. We're not trying to be professionally produced radio. We just want the opportunity. Like, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, I do find that after a while you get a little more picky about things, and then.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But you don't, like, I just started out, I think I was showing people last week, I just bought this at a music store, right into my phone, and it gives awesome sound. And I just started filming right off the bat, and the first few are really crappy, and they just got better and better.
Yeah.
And I think just honestly, people don't, we were talking before the show started about how it's changing now. I mean, we're doing these shows from homes. This is new technology, and how we're changing the way we do it. I mean, obviously we have a few questions here, but it's just keep it simple, right? From the beginning.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Just get it out there. You can improve it later. And I think one of the biggest things in this or any sort of content creation is you have to give yourself permission to fail. Like, if you're worried about being perfect, you'll never get it out. Just get it out, and the next one will be better. You can always just keep improving.
Yeah. Okay. So first question here is, how do you organize your time? How much time do you allot for podcasting videos, and do you allot time for editing? So you can answer and then I'll answer for mine.
Sure. One of the nice things, I think, if you're having trouble getting started, trying not to do it on your own is a great idea, because you can divvy up that time. There are 3 of us, and we kind of each have roles that were never specifically created, but we just kind of fell into. We all brainstorm the ideas of what we're going to do together, but I do most of the booking of the guests. I'm the one who talks to the people and tries to find out when they can get on. And if you're doing that, I recommend trying to batch book people, because Jane, I'm sure you agree with this. People are going to cancel on you, and they're going to, getting people to participate is one of the most time-consuming parts of the process. As far as editing from the podcast goes, I don't edit. Matt does the edit. The only thing I do after we finish the podcast is I listen to the whole thing once we publish it, and then I cut 1 to 3 smaller clips, usually around 5 minutes, segments of the show. And then I run those as video ads where people see the kind of quick clip. Hopefully it's a hook. And then there's a link to listen to the full episode below it. That's my involvement post. As far as like the video stuff, like Eat New West and things that I was talking about there, that's kind of a passion project. I mean, I can spend an hour a week editing that. I can spend 6 hours a week editing that, but that's stuff, I don't consider that real estate time. That's something I'm doing because I care about it and it's fun. And you can shop that stuff out too if you're not particularly good at it or you don't enjoy it.
Yeah, for me, what we do, actually for this show, we started with we brought in a program called Calendly.
Nice.
And we book everybody. They just go in, we send them the link. They have specific times, so they're booked. Just if you're a realtor, allow for travel time. What we do for my businesses, we actually book them in at 10:30 every day. So I try and get 4 or 5 ahead of time. So if I know that things are going to be slow in November and December, I'll do like 10 or 15 interviews, so that the first few weeks in January I'm not so busy. And I find that in terms of videos, my assistant does all my editing. To be honest, I don't care about it being perfect. She does a great job, and she gets it out there. And what I like about farming it out to somebody is that it gets done, because there's no way I'm going to do it. I'm going to do only what I can do, which is talk to people about real estate and sell real estate. And that's not her wheelhouse. Her wheelhouse is to support me, and she does a great job. Okay, so Carol says, great to hear you how you progressed and the improvement over time. Just sent out a video to my network and the response was more amazing. The power of video, is that why you went from podcast to videotaping your podcast?
Yeah, I mean, it was something. I mean, my back, like we talked about earlier, my background is film. I wanted the podcast to be on video from day one. Like I that was something I wanted it to be a part of. The way I consume a lot of podcasts. Like I'm a bit of a podcast junkie. I'm listening to it in the car, but I do watch a lot of podcasts as well too. The other guys were a little bit more nervous about getting that started right at the beginning, but they're at the point now where they're using video in their businesses as well. So eventually, once it wasn't a hurdle for them anymore and we'd kind of gotten comfortable, it was easier to pitch it again and say like, hey, you know, this is one more level we could add to it, and another way for people to engage and just constantly improve.
Yeah. I find as well too that you were talking about using BombBomb, and now with the advent of Zoom on everybody's desktop, it's just, I think it's going to be less of an issue, and people just need to realize A, they're specialists and people need to hear their information, and B, they need to kind of get over themselves.
Yeah.
I never watch anything after. Do you?
I watch it about 1 billion times before I publish it, but once it's published, no, I'm done.
Yeah, it's done.
On to the next thing.
Okay, so often we get asked about what kind of topics are good for podcasts. So what have you listened to that you enjoy? What topics in real estate? So there's the Unreal Estate Show. There's, realtors in the US. There's Brian Buffini. There's a whole bunch of different levels and interests. What do you think a podcast should reflect for a realtor?
So are you asking just what I enjoy from real estate listening to, or yeah.
Topics?
The main show I listen to, I like Richard Robbins's podcast. Mostly it's him interviewing successful agents and just talking to them about like what worked, what didn't work, how did they get there, and I find it fascinating. I think one of the best skills you can develop if you're trying to get better at podcasting is becoming really good at interviewing people and getting them talking. My wife comes from the broadcast world, and I made her listen to probably our first 10 episodes, and the amount of notes she had for me of like, no, you're doing all of this wrong. Like, why didn't you ask the follow-up question here? Why did you ask a follow-up question there? It was done. Like really listening and getting into the rhythm. And that's just something you develop over time. But I really appreciate shows where they can really interview well, and I'm not sitting there being like, oh, I want them to ask them this, and then they don't. As far as great topics, I think there's two categories for topics that have really succeeded in our show. There's the evergreen sort of educational stuff of here's the process that we know and totally get, and it doesn't mean anything to us, but it's new to you, and here's how to take you through it. Whether it's a home inspection, whether it's how to read your strata minutes, whether it's everything you need to know about property taxes, like just all the things that we're experts on that people have no idea about, the stuff we don't know that they don't know. That stuff makes great content. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I find too that as realtors, we are quite specialized, but we don't know that we're specialized.
Totally. Yeah, I 100% agree. And then the other thing that we get great responses on, you were mentioning like day in the life of a realtor, all the behind the scenes stuff. Like there's a reason there's 1 million HGTV shows about real estate. People find real estate interesting, and all that fly on the wall stuff seems to go over really, really well.
Yeah.
We did an episode about door knocking, and none of us who do the podcast are door knockers. So we brought on a couple realtors who are, and basically we just quizzed them like almost from the audience's perspective of like, what would drive you? Like, why do you want to knock on a stranger's door, and tell us the horror stories? And is this as awful as it sounds? And they told great stories, both success and embarrassing, and it was super entertaining, and ton of people responded to it. It was great.
Do you find that really a podcast or any sort of show is really a reflection of your own personality then?
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. One of my favorite podcasters is Tim Ferriss, and he often talks about how he doesn't even really think about what the audience wants to learn. He just thinks about what he wants to learn and then books people accordingly. And he trusts that if he finds it interesting, somebody else, like the right audience, will find it as well. And we do think about whether the audience will find it interesting or not, but we also, we've been doing this a couple years now, and to show up every week and be excited about it, you have to be talking about things that you're excited to talk about. We went through a phase where we got a little burned out and didn't want to do it anymore. And we took a couple months off and then decided, hey, we missed this. How can we keep it interesting? And the big answer is make sure we're talking about stuff that we're fired up about, that we want to talk about. And those episodes go really well. It plays for sure.
I'm finding that the conversation for my podcast at Vancouver Island Time is changing. So before it was very structured, and I'd ask, tell me about your neighborhood. And then I found out that some people lived in an area, but they actually spent all their time in another area. They didn't know their area. So I'm trying to draw it all out of them. And now what I'm finding is the conversation is more about the person and their approach. So what I'm trying to say in the short run here is that things will evolve and your podcast will change over time, and that's okay. So I have another question for you. So you have it, if you go to your website, realestatenewwest.com, you just have it as a tiny link on the right.
Yep.
And it says multiple offers. It doesn't say podcast or anything. So how do people find you?
Well, some people do find it through the website. I mean, it's mostly there so that if somebody is looking for it, it's there and they can find it. But the number one way I should say all three of us advertise it differently. But the number one way I advertise it is before video. I would just run a Google ad targeting New Westminster specifically, geographically, and then people who had expressed interest in real estate. And, you turn an ad on for a month and just run an ad for a specific episode, and it would get a ton of downloads through that. And it's not expensive. You could spend $5 or $10 a month advertising your podcast, and it'll get into lots of people's earballs. And now, though, that we've added video, I'm doing those little video clips. And so I put those on my YouTube channel, and then either share it organically through social, or if it's an episode that I think will be good for reaching out to a lot of people, I'll run an ad.
Right. I don't do any paid advertisement for any of my stuff.
Yeah.
And I find it's interesting. So we have a website specifically for the podcast. We also link it through a real estate website. And then we have a link back so that people can find us. We also do YouTube, and we started organizing. We actually met with a really great consultant. Her name is Adara. Oh my God. She's with Spiro Creative. Angelucci is her last name. There's a funny episode where I'm trying to say her last name. That's why I got caught on that. But I find that that's been helpful to help us just organize things, because now I'm getting more and more and more video. So you really have to be organized. Once you get to a point, you can't just have it like blah.
Right. Yeah.
So on your podcast site, you have all your episodes just kind of one by one by one. Are you planning on editing that site at all, or?
Are you talking about, because the podcast does have its own website? Is that what you mean, or do you mean my real estate website?
When I looked at the multiple offers site.
Okay. Yeah.
It seems like it's a list of podcasts. Or did I go to the wrong place?
No, I think that's just hosted by Podbean, that website. And no, we don't spend a whole lot of time curating it or doing it. One thing that's interesting though is, before we started recording, I went through my stats through Podbean, and there are specific episodes even without advertising that just people cling to for whatever reason. Like Strata 101 we did, which was just everything you need to know about living in a strata. That gets downloads every week. Every week people download that. They're downloading it from the Podbean site. They're downloading it from my real estate site, Matt and Jeremy's real estate sites, like all over the place. But people find that there are certain episodes that for whatever reason just hook people more than others. And, they're probably 1 out of every 5. There's one that just really gets good attention.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes we know, like we did when there was an election happening in New West, we interviewed all of the city council candidates. We knew that was going to get an absolute ton of downloads, and it did. But we also had a handyman on and just talked about home renovations. And I thought that'd just be an average episode. And, it got 4 or 5 times the amount of downloads as our average one. Like people went nuts. You kind of just throw everything at the wall and see what people respond to.
I found one of my biggest ones was I just had a home inspector on, and he's not even a guy I use a lot, but he's very engaging. And so we got a lot of downloads from there. And I also find certain areas that I have done, or people that have lived in the neighborhood, I call them centers of influence networkers, who are instrumental in sort of changing their community, or they know everybody. So those always get a lot, or maybe a topic of interest right now. So we're doing a lot of local businesses, and we just changed the format. And do you find, what I'm asking you is, do you find once you get started and you get the ball rolling, it's easy to just start to be more fluid with the way you're doing it, in order, like you can react, as you said, you're throwing spaghetti at the wall, what's sticking? And then you go, okay, well, that's sticking, so I'm going to go that way. You don't have to follow the same plan for the whole time you're running your podcast, right?
No, definitely not. In fact, I think if you don't change, you'll probably get pretty bored. I would think it. You got to do stuff to keep it interesting. I mean, and what we pictured the podcast would be, and what it is. Like at the beginning, we thought like, okay, we're going to have a section where we talk about stories in real estate, and we're going to have a question of the week, and then we're going to have our main topic, and we had like these 5 or 6 different segments organized more like a radio show. And now we kind of just have one main topic and we just chat about it. And usually we fill the entire time with doing it. We used to have massive notes. I found in the beginning, we really overplanned what we were going to say, and what it lost was spontaneity. What we really wanted was this, like you're sitting with us at lunch over a beer talking about real estate. And we lost that the more we planned too much. And so when now we kind of just have a flow. Like we were interviewing an agent out of Toronto who runs like a 25-person team, and he does over 700 deals a year. And none of us are like big team guys. Like I work with my dad. My mom is our assistant. Like we're a real mom and pop shop. So that was totally foreign to us. So when we were prepping for it, we were just like, okay, well, what do we want to make sure we talk about with him? And we're like, okay, well, we got to talk about how he's changing with Corona. We got to talk about how, at 25 members, how is he not just a brokerage? Like how does that work? And then, how he trains his agents, because unlike a lot of these mega teams, I don't know if you have it in Victoria as much, but out here we get mega teams where on paper it sounds like they're doing great, but then you do the math and you're like, oh, each agent's only doing like 2 deals a year. That's not impressive at all. But his numbers were very impressive. So we're like, okay, let's talk about how he trains these people. But other than that, those like 3 main points, we just had a map of, okay, we just need to make sure in the 40 minutes we're going to hit those 3. Other than that, let's just see where it goes. And I think it becomes a lot more interesting, and you find these little spontaneous moments, and it's just more human.
I agree. And actually, I'm the same way. So this is my notes for ours on the back of it.
Nice. Yeah.
But I was actually hoping we would get some more questions from our watchers, but that's okay. We'll get them on the other end.
Sure.
Okay, the last thing I just want to talk about is your site that you're hosting on. So you use Podbean, I use Spreaker,
Yep.
and Braden week was using Anchor. What do you like about using Podbean?
It's easy. It wasn't very expensive. I don't remember what the cost is. We pay a one-time annual fee, and it's like nothing. And we did a ton of research when we started it, and it seemed really good compared to all the others. It's interesting that you brought up Braden, though. Like Braden, Braden's a friend of mine, and his podcast, not the new one he's starting, but his old one he had one where he hadn't released an episode in, I think it was like 6 months. And it was driving me nuts because somehow he was still beating me in ranking if you searched Vancouver podcasts. And I was talking to him at a convention. And I'm like, how are you doing this? And I believe him because he's a friend of mine and I don't think he'd lie. But he was just like, well, I think it's just who I was using to host because I've done nothing. Like I've done absolutely nothing. So we rank pretty well when you search us, but I think that's just because we've been around so long. I don't know that Podbean is the best solution. It was, again, we just wanted to get started.
I think SEO, so it's your words, like it depends on what your topic is. So ironically, I started my podcast just before Braden, and I was thinking, okay, I should do the Vancouver Island real estate show. And the person I was talking to said, oh, well, really, it's Victoria and it's slow. It's an island time, Vancouver Island time. Let's do Vancouver Island time. That's how the name came about.
Nice.
So, okay, we have one question. If you got to go back and tell your past self some advice from the beginning as you were starting, what advice would you give?
That's a great question.
Do it.
I think, well, the one smaller piece that wouldn't fit to everybody, we originally envisioned the show, like I was talking about 3 agents who were not working together. And so we'd have all these different perspectives. After about a year, the other 2 guys teamed up. So they are partners now. So now it's 2-on-1. I would have maybe tried to get a 4th person in there to balance that a little bit. But if I was going to go back, I would say more guests off the beginning. At the start, it was not as many interviews. Interviews do great. Like you were talking about, those people also push the podcast out, and you're also creating advocates. It's fantastic. Like at the start, I think we were probably 3 episodes topic, 1 episode interview a month, and I would go 50-50 right off the bat. And also not be afraid. Like, we didn't talk a whole lot of inside baseball at the start. We tried to be very accessible. And what we've learned as we went is the more inside, as long as you can take them along the journey with you, you don't alienate them. But the more you let them into, hey, this is how real estate really works. People find that stuff really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. They like the stories.
Yes. Stories are huge for sure.
Yeah. So Angela, we actually talked about this a bit last week. If you want to join the Real Estate Podcaster group, it's free. We're just there to mentor one another. But for me, it would be just get going. It took 5 years for me to come up with the concept. And I would say just start talking real estate, and your passion will direct you in where you want to go. I wouldn't worry about it being perfect. I think that's probably my biggest advice is don't be perfect.
Yeah, and one thing that maybe runs a little counter to what we're both saying, but I think it does work in tandem, is even though just get going, I'd say bank 3 episodes before you publish one. And we did a test episode. So we did an episode 0, which we knew we were never going to publish, and it was terrible. And then we did 3, and once we had 3 in the can, we released them, and we released them all the same week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Now we release 1 a week. But at the start, it was really great. And we had them all kind of interconnected, and we left hooks at the end of every episode about, hey, we want to get more into this, but we're out of time. Here's what we're going to be talking about next episode. And our launch went really well, even though it wasn't perfect and there were lots of mistakes. And I think, yeah, it'll go great, and just keep at it.
I think the first rule too is make your first episode an introduction about who you are. Mine is terrible on Vancouver. So if you want a good laugh, go there. Go ahead.
We talked about real estate, like cars realtors drive, in our first episode, because I drive a cheap Ford, Jeremy drives a Jeep, and Matt drives a beat up old pickup truck. And it's just so counterintuitive to what people think Vancouver realtors drive, that we thought it would be a good shock to the system and a nice way to discuss what the car you drive says about you. And we got to take some shots at each other and have a bit of fun. And it went great. People liked it. So
that's true. Actually, the one thing I like about the fact that now that we're online a lot, and I'm meeting up with a lot of other realtors on Zoom calls and learning, doing professional development and learning from people and exchanging ideas, is just with the similarities and differences, like what is a functionality of somebody's personality, what's a function of someone's personality, and what's a function of the business, and it changes. So you know, I'm very glad that we have such a great system here. I realized how powerful real estate is in British Columbia, and the Torrens system. I just love it. And the fact that, you know, once people write a transaction, it's basically going to go through. So anyway, okay. So you guys, next week we're going to have Sarah Kulke. She is a coach in Alberta. She runs a really cool Facebook site called, I think it's Badass Women in Real Estate or something. What is it called? I'm a member of it, and I'm on it every day, and I can't remember. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Just search for badasses. If you're a woman in real estate, you want to hear what she has to say. She is really, really down to earth. She does hundreds of transactions every year, and it's just her and her assistant, one or two of them. She's going to talk about why she got into podcasting, and her when asked what her raison d'etre was, she said it was because she wanted to talk to people she wanted to learn from, and she wanted it to be interesting. So that's it, of interest to me. So check us out next Friday. She's going to be in the Real Estate Podcaster group. If you want more information about real estate in Victoria, contact me. I'm Jane Johnston with the Briar Hill Group. And if you want information about real estate in New Westminster, Geoff, how do they get in touch with you?
My website is realestatennewwest.com, or you can send me a text, 604-375-9440.
Totally accessible. I love it. Okay, awesome. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining us, and we'll see you on Monday at 4:30. Take care. Bye. All right.